Hi, in this video, and should say that I haven't recorded a video in a number of years. I've been busy running AWS user groups here in Florida, but I'm back. So we're going to first talk about saving money in the cloud. And I look at a lot of customer environments in my role as a solution architect, and security and cost optimization are things that typically are left for a rainy day. People are focusing on keeping the lights on, new workloads, new infrastructure, innovation. Maybe they're playing around with AI, but this talk is really to talk about how important it is to save money in the cloud. And as the statement says here, your CFO really doesn't care about how elegant your environment is, how good it looks from a resiliency perspective. Well, they might care a little bit, but ultimately they want to make sure that you're running the cloud efficiently and not essentially burning money in the cloud. And so I'm going to give you some tips and tricks to help you do that. So if you think about wasting money, what that does is really erode your company's margins, your profits. Typically, and I've been a CIO, I've been a CTO. I know that running infrastructure on-prem is a lot different. You go through capital budgets, you go through expense budgets. Everything has to get improved. The cloud, it's essentially you run a script or you point and click. You're deploying resources that may be costly, and there really aren't any approval gates typically. And so you have to understand that by and large, the average waste is around 20 to 30%, as you can see here. And I have a chance to assess a lot of environments, customer AWS environments. I do work for an AWS partner, not AWS directly, but I see a lot of customers using AWS. And I would say that 20 to 30% overspend is typically what I see, both across small to mid-market businesses as well as enterprise businesses. I also see a lot of times people are migrated to the cloud and they were over-provisioned on VMware because you own that capital equipment. You might as well use the virtual CPUs and the storage. If you already have it and you're not using it otherwise, I understand allocating it to VMs just in case you need the horsepower. But on AWS, you pay as you go. You're only paying for what you use, and you're paying that on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And so you want to make sure that if you've recently migrated to the cloud, that you make sure that you're not over-provisioned. And we're going to talk about some tools that'll let you do that. And then my last statement here is, hey, are you busy doing day-to-day tasks? That's too bad. Make time for cost optimization. AWS has some great tools to help you do that. You know, a couple years ago, it was a lot more manual, or you had to use a third-party application to help you find ways to save money. But there are tools in the AWS console to help you do that, and we're going to talk about it. So one of the great announcements at reInvent, and the joke is that reInvent has become an AI conference, but they did talk about some things that weren't related to AI, and one of those was AWS Database Savings Plans. And this is great, and it's not if you're using SQL Server or any other database on an EC2 instance. These AWS Database Savings Plans are all for RDS, the Managed Database Services. It says up to 35% discount. Those discounts are really based on what database platform you're using. If you're using Aurora, which is AWS's version of open source database, and you get up to 35%. There's lower discount percentages if you're using SQL Server or other database platforms, but only a 1-year commitment. So you can have up to 35% discount with a 1-year commitment. You can change your database platform. You can move from AMD or Intel over to Graviton. So this gives you a lot of flexibility and much better than what it was before. The database services covered you list here, basically any databases within RDS. And then you have some additional database platforms covered by the discount. In terms of flexibility, as I mentioned, you can really change engines, instance types, regions. It's just a savings plan, essentially, just like you have for EC2. So if you use RDS, or if you had never used RDS because it was a little more expensive than running your database on an EC2 instance, I suggest you take a look at the new database savings plan. It could save you quite a bit of money. This is so much better than the old way. The old way was RDS reserved instances. And if you haven't heard, slowly but surely, reserved instances are going away. You'll notice that a lot of the new EC2 instance types don't support reserved instances or RIs. Savings plans are really the strategic way that AWS is going to allow you to have some spend commitment in return for some savings. But the old way with RDS, same restrictions as you get with any reserved instance, locked into an instance type. To get the max savings, you'd have to do a 3-year commitment. If you committed to an RDS instance, reserved instance, and you were doing AMD or an Intel chips, you couldn't then switch to Graviton to save money because your reserved instance was tied to the previous chipset, AMD or Intel. So very inflexible. So this RDS savings plan is definitely one of your tools that you need to look at as a way to save money on your AWS spend. There's a new feature in Compute Optimizer, and I'm going to talk about additional tools, but Compute Optimizer is one of those tools that helps you right size your EC2 instances. AWS doesn't necessarily always make it easy for you to to save money. They make it easy to spend money. They don't make it easy to save money, but Compute Optimizer has been around for a while. Now they are looking at idle resources to help you out. Do you have EC2 instances that really either, because of low CPU, could be consolidated onto another instance? Maybe they can be removed altogether. Unattached EBS volumes. I see this a lot when I look at customer environments. A lot of money being spent on EBS volumes that people are keeping just in case. There is a way with Compute Optimizer to actually enact some of the cost savings. So one of the new features with the automation is the orphan EBS volumes. Through automation, through the console, you can go ahead and create a snapshot of those EBS volumes just in case you need it later, and then have the EBS volume removed. The great thing is Compute Optimizer also allows you to fail back. If you did need that EBS volume, you can do that through the console. So slowly but surely, AWS is removing any friction that prevented you from saving money easily. Auto-scaling groups. It'll take a look at idle auto-scaling groups, over-provisioned instances. Based on the AWS metrics, using Compute Optimizer, organizations see a 30 to 45% reduction. I see something similar, so definitely Compute Optimizer is something you want to get familiar with if you haven't already. So kill your zombies. We just talked about Compute Optimizer. It is so easy to provision dev and test instances. You're doing maybe some R&D, trying some things out. You get distracted. You're working on other projects, and those instances just stick around, and people kind of forget what they are, or they're afraid to delete it because they don't know who actually deployed those resources. No one used a tag to say, hey, this belongs to me. So definitely you want to look at Compute Optimizer. You want to deploy Cost Optimization Hub. And if you have Datadog, Dynatrace, they have some additional insights into your EC2 instances, but anything that's over-provisioned, not being used, been around for a while, no one knows what it is, those are usually pretty easy savings for you to obtain. So stop paying for empty offices. This analogy is saying, hey, you are running typically your dev test resources 24/7. Now, prod, I understand, prod needs to typically be up every hour of every day. But on your dev and test instances, if you consider if you only needed your dev and test instances, typically up to 10 hours a day, that's 50 hours a week. If you let those dev test instances run all week, that's 168 hours. So you are leaving about 70% savings on your dev test EC2 instances. You're leaving those savings on the table. And there's a couple ways for you to get your dev test instances on a schedule. AWS has an instance scheduler. You can deploy that. You can download the CloudFormation templates. You can run that. That will give you access to an instance scheduler. You use tags to indicate the schedule, when you want it started, when you want it stopped. Now, you're not locked into that. If you need to work on a Saturday, you can go ahead and manually start those instances. But this is definitely a great savings, and this is something a lot of companies don't think about. If you needed something more robust than Instance Scheduler, or there's also a resource scheduler inside of SMS on AWS. But if either of those solutions don't really give you the robustness that you need, or maybe you have some special use cases, you can write your own event bridge rules. You can use Lambda. A lot of good articles about that from AWS. But what I would say is definitely take a look. Can you stop running dev test 24/7? The reality check down here at the bottom of the slide, it just shows you that you can save, 140 minus 42. So you can save $98 a month just on one dev instance. And so if you look at all your dev test instances, there's probably great savings for you to have. So definitely check that out. One of the things people have to remind is, as much as the security mantra is security is a journey, I would say the same thing with cost optimization. You don't pick a month and focus on cost optimization and then you're done with cost optimization. You have typically a very dynamic AWS environment. Changes are always being made. You have to come up with some kind of rhythm, some kind of schedule to make sure that cost optimization is staying top of mind, regardless of how busy everyone gets. So I've listed here some of the common tasks that I typically recommend to customers. What are you going to do weekly? What are you going to do monthly? And I listed here, maybe once a year, get a complimentary or paid cost optimization assessment from a third party, just in case there's things that you weren't thinking about. Maybe AWS came out with some recent new chipsets, some new instance types that run much more efficiently, much more inexpensively than the older chipset. So you might consider having a third party come in. For instance, the company I work for, we do complimentary cost optimization assessments. So regardless of how you do that, you might consider maybe once a year having someone come in and make sure you're not missing anything. So what are the tools that you want in your toolbox if you are responsible or you want to step up to the plate and help your company save money on AWS? One is Cost Explorer. You don't have much insight into how to save money if you don't know how you're spending money today, especially if you use tags. What are my dev test instances costing? What are my production instances costing? What are my databases costing? So you want to use Cost Explorer. You want to watch those trends. Are things getting a little out of whack? Do you have some unknown cost hitting your bill? Going to be a lot easier to slice and dice the numbers in Cost Explorer than it is looking at that very detailed, very verbose monthly AWS invoice. So if you're not using Cost Explorer, use that today. Compute Optimizer we talked about. Always run this on a regular basis. Maybe assess that once a month or once a quarter at least, but make sure that everything is being right-sized. Cost Optimization Hub, think this came out maybe a year or two ago. It's a great single pane of glass to let you know what are all the ways that you can save money. Can you save money on S3? Can you save money with EBS? Can you save money with your EC2 instances, RDS? Cost Optimization Hub is a great way for your company or for you to understand how you can save money. Now, some of those recommendations may not apply to your instance. There may be some reasons why. Maybe something needs to be over provisioned. Nonetheless, Cost Optimization Hub comes up with a lot of great examples. And then Savings Plans Analyzer. If you get some recommendations, hey, if I commit to a savings plan and I commit to a certain amount of spend, whether that's for EC2 or RDS or SageMaker, Savings Plan Analyzer helps you analyze how much are you going to save. Typically, I recommend customers don't commit to 100% of your current spend. Typically, you want to start saving money, so you don't want to overcommit on your savings plan because then you're paying for resources that you don't even need. So maybe 75, 80% of what your current spend is something you want to commit to. Especially if your company is growing and your AWS bill typically goes up year over year. If your company is being downsized, savings plans may not make sense. But take a look at the Savings Plan Analyzer. It gets rid of a lot of the unknowns. What if I did this? What if I did that? They support what if scenarios pretty well. So take a look at that. The last thing I'll mention that's not on the slide is really set a budget and set up budget alerts. If you know that typically you're only spending $5,000, $10,000, $50,000 a month on AWS, you want to have some way to kind of track that and be alerted if all of a sudden something looks a little off kilter. So to summarize, stop wasting money, and whatever you save on AWS, reinvest that. Reinvest those savings into training, reinvest those savings in innovation, reinvest those savings in maybe some Gen AI pilot projects. But you can save typically up to 30%. As I've said, I see this time and time again with both small, medium, and large size customers. AWS reports typically 4 to 6 weeks to ROI. So whatever time and effort or tooling that you put in to save money, you've got a pretty quick ROI of 4 to 6 weeks. So if you can get that ROI in a month and a half, you're not going to see many projects that have an ROI with that quick turnaround. Lastly, I'll call out again, if you're using RDS, and databases are typically the second biggest spend companies make on AWS. First, not surprisingly, is EC2. And then comes your database spend. So if you can save 35%, if you're using RDS, again, that's for Aurora, SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL will be less than 35%, but AWS will give you all of the discounts. Definitely take a look at that. And keep in mind, every dollar you save can be reinvested. Maybe you need to modernize your platform. Maybe you need to get rid of your monolithic applications, but may do something wise and do something strategic with those savings. And so lastly, I think FinOps, you have to consider it's not just saving money. And I know a lot of people in technology, if you're a technical resource, you figure it's not my job to save money. And if you work in a large enterprise class company, you probably have a FinOps team, and it's their job. But if you're smaller than that, typically FinOps or cost optimization is responsible of IT. So think of it a way to make sure that you are going to save money to the best of your ability. It's important to get in a good rhythm and reinvest those savings. So if you came up with a way to save money, you can either deliver that back to the bottom line, or you can say, hey, leadership, I'm saving money, and my plan is to reinvest that into training, into certification, into some pilot projects. However you want to reinvest those savings is up to you, but it's often a nice way to reinvest, and that's further motivation for you to save money. So if you have any other tips or tricks for saving money on AWS, Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'll do my best to get to those questions. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you next time.